or think about social media differently. Think about social media as a space that we live in, a human space, rather than a marketing or communications channel. Okay, so that's one of my objectives, is to encourage you to look at it like that. And the second one is to give you a bunch of ideas, concepts, etc., to be able to have these discussions about the different types of online presence that we can have and what's important about them. So two things: see social media differently and have some vocabulary and ideas. And I've designed this talk more as a conversation starter, so we're going to go through quite a lot of things. It's reasonably complex because it has to do with relationships and identity. Those are really the two main themes that are underlying everything I'm going to be talking about. And as I guess everybody knows, relationships are complicated, and identity is also something that's not straightforward. So to start off, I'm going to tell you two stories. The first story is about how I landed my first job when I finished studying. Actually, before I finished studying. This was in the year 2000. Orange had just opened in Switzerland. And it so happens that they had hired a guy as the call center manager who was a friend of the family. And my brother had just finished studying at that moment. And this family friend, he needed somebody to do the schedules for the people in the call center. And said, oh, Jonathan, my brother's name is Jonathan, said, Jonathan, can you come and help me? And so my brother went on, and that became his job. And a few months later, or a few weeks later, I came back from a year in India, and they needed people. And so my brother said, hey, you know, you should apply for this temp job here. And so I did a few months of temp job, and then one thing led to another, and it became my first stable part-time job when I finished my studies and after my studies. So, first story. Second story, later, I'm already a freelancer, and this is the story of how I got a long-running gig. I used to chat a lot in the early 2000s. That's actually what got me hooked on the internet. In 98, I started chatting, sometimes until 5 o'clock in the morning, very unreasonable. And so around 2004, 2006, I was chatting a lot in an IRC channel that had been set up by a guy who, it was basically a random bunch of geeks talking about this and that. So I would, instead of writing my dissertation, I would just spend time chatting with these people. And of course I became friends with a bunch of people there, including the guy who was running the channel. And a couple of years later, so I was already a blogger. I was one of the few, the growing number of French-speaking bloggers. And this guy arrived, started blogging, was an entrepreneur, he knew all the journalists. So he arrived with this big entrepreneur boot in our little hippy-dippy, francophone blogosphere. And it went down rather badly. People didn't like him. I didn't like him at all. And he actually bought a little blogging platform. He sold it to another bigger blogging platform. And there was a lot of hoo-ha around it, a lot of problems in the French-speaking blogosphere, and I wrote a nasty article about him. And it so happens that this guy, who I knew because I was hanging out in his chat room, was the guy who had taught this other French guy how to blog. And one day he said, oh, Stephanie, come in here, you need to speak with this chap because we can't have you two not getting along. And so, okay, I was introduced to him, chatted a bit. And a few years later, this guy launched a startup, and I thought the product was pretty good. And as I was we were in more friendly terms. I didn't really like him much at that time, but the product was good, and so I said, that's pretty good, and then went to San Francisco, met up with him, had lunch, and became, friendly acquaintances, friendly business acquaintances. And a few years after that, he was running a big conference, and I'd done some work at another conference that I thought I might be able to do with his. And so, I caught him on Skype, said, hey, how are you doing? You heard about what I did with this conference? Said, oh, actually we need to talk because I need you for this, this, and that. And that became the gig that lasted for 4 or 5 years. So, I'm telling you these two stories because the common thing in both of them that I want to insist upon tonight is that these are situations where my personal connections, in the first place family, in the second friends and casual acquaintances, played an important role for my professional life. okay, getting a first job or getting a long-standing gig. And if you think back to your professional experience, so some of you might be employees, others might be freelancers or have your own business, try and think back, you know, that we all have these stories where serendipity or personal connections played a role in our professional life. And we tend to dismiss them saying, well, yeah, that was just chance. But actually, if you really start thinking about it, it's quite normal. It is very often the case that our personal lives or relationships come in and play a role in our professional lives. Not all the time, but often enough that it's worth looking at. One concept I'd like to introduce now is weak ties. You might have heard about it. It's a concept that was introduced in '73 by this guy, Mark Granoletta, in a paper titled The Strength of Weak Ties, which is available online. You can find it and read it. It's an academic paper. And these weak ties are, for those of you who might not be familiar with the concept, it's basically the people that you know but you're not close to. So it's not your close family and friends and people you see regularly. It's people that you know, acquaintances, people you were in school with, basically your network, your extended network. And there are a few interesting things to note here. The first one is that network overlap is stronger for strong ties. So if you think about the people who are very close to you, you have lots of friends in common, if you look at Facebook, okay? You've got tons of friends in common. Weak ties are people with whom you have less friends in common, and therefore these weak ties often connect you to other and different networks and people you don't know, okay? So these weak ties are going to give you access to new information or new opportunities. So if you think business, well, that's important, okay? Because if you're just doing business with the people that you really know very well, your business is going to tank very soon because they'll have enough of you. And another thing is that these weak ties are not very costly to maintain. Maintaining a friendship or an intimate relationship takes work and time and emotional investment. But maintaining, hey, don't do that to me, maintaining a casual acquaintance, that requires less investment. And the online world and social media, social networks are really good for weak ties. So that's why I'm going to talk about the online stuff. One thing that you can do online that you cannot do offline easily is what I call the message in a bottle. It's when you post a note on Facebook saying, does anybody know if blah blah blah? Or do you know somebody who needs a second-hand TV? Or do you know somebody who could fix my computer? Or do you know somebody who has these skills? Or I'm looking for a rocking chair. Anybody have a spare one? So this is difficult to do offline because you can go and ask your friends as you see them. But with Facebook or LinkedIn or an online social network which pretty much captures all the people you know, you can just post it and hope it doesn't take much work. You know, just write a Facebook post. And it doesn't put pressure on the people you're asking. Because if you're all my friends and I go and ask you all directly, hey, do you know somebody who has a rocking chair to give? Then I'm kind of asking you for a direct favor or something. Whereas if I just post it on Facebook, if you don't know anybody with a rocking chair, you're just going to pass your way and look at more cat pictures or social media articles. And you're probably all familiar with pull versus push, okay? If a pull message is basically a website, the information is there, and if you want it, you go and fetch it. A push message is typically an email, you send it and try and put it under people's noses, okay? And so the message in the bottle is a very pull kind of thing. You just stick it there, you post it on the bulletin board, and there you go. Of course, the prerequisite for this kind of message in the bottle thing to work is that you need to have connections. This happened, I had clients with this problem and they started out on Twitter. They said, Twitter sucks, it's useless. I post stuff and nobody ever answers. Yeah, who's following you? 30 people, well, okay. That's not going to go very far. Okay, so you need connections before you can do this kind of stuff. Now, let's look a bit at why online is great for these weak ties. And if you think about my two stories, they are definitely stories which made weak ties come into play. Okay, even the family friend, he was a friend of my parents, right? And it's through him, I saw him twice a year. Didn't know him very well, he didn't know me very well, but it's through him that I got this job. So, online, a certain number of interesting things happen that make it a great environment for weak ties. The first one is that the online world removes geographical and time constraints. Okay, you can communicate with people even if they're not physically located where you are. And that's important when you think about your network. It's not, geography is a huge constraint, so get rid of that. You can also contact people or be in touch without forcing interaction. The message in the bottle example shows that, but also, you know, if I post photos of what I'm doing, or status updates, or I share articles, it's not the same thing if I send a direct message to people with an article, or if I just post it on my Facebook wall. Okay, this is this idea of ambient intimacy that Lisa Reichelt, I think she's the one who coined the term. It was about Twitter, but it's true in many of these social networks, is that it's a bit like the online water cooler. Okay, if you think about an office setting, the coffee machine or the water cooler is where you're going to casually bump into colleagues and say, hey, how are you doing? Or, hey, you don't look great today, what's going on? And you might have a chat about something not very interesting, not very relevant, but it's this kind of interaction that actually creates relationships. Okay, it often starts with that rather than deep, meaningful conversations. A lot of criticism that was made concerning social media in the early days of social media was, look at what people are posting on it. It's rubbish, it's uninteresting. They're talking about stuff that's meaningless, but it's not for them. If you go to the cafe or restaurant and listen to the conversations at the table next to you, it's probably not going to be very interesting because you're not in it. Okay? And so this type of communication is really suited to weak ties. You can casually share stuff and see what happens with it. You can also, at the bottom of this slide, you can say hi on Facebook to somebody you haven't spoken to in 4 years. Calling them up, sending an email asking for something, kind of too, right? And you can even, I've reconnected with people I was in school with when I was in kindergarten on Facebook. We haven't spoken for 30 years. And we first you like something, and then maybe you leave a comment, and maybe one day you see something that makes you think, oh, I need to speak to this person, so you send a message on Facebook, and just a very casual message, and you see if they reply. Oh, they reply, and then you start chatting and say, hey, how fun that we're meeting on Facebook after all these years. And you start chatting so much that you realize they're actually quite a nice person, even though you didn't get on in kindergarten, and you end up going to Paris to visit them and staying at their place, and you make a new friend in your adult life. These things happen. So, I hope that with these little descriptions I've given you, you're starting to see that the online world is really a social space, and the early days of social media, it was all about that. Nowadays, when you say social media, immediately people think marketing. Okay, Facebook campaigns, marketing, brands. But these social tools were designed for people to connect. And this brings us to networking. You know how important networking and your network is to your professional life. And actually, it's all about relationships, right? You can't be a good networker if you don't know how to create relationships with people. So, to create relationships, you need to be a person. This is the first important thing. It's trivial, but online it is often forgotten, because I see people who try to have a very controlled online presence, because they need to be professional, right? Or they have a personal brand, and so they want to be seen as this or that, or remembered for this or that, and so you try to control. You think about, okay, what messages am I going to communicate about myself so that people remember me and want to do business with me? But if you treat yourself like a brand, you're not a person anymore. And if you're not a person, you can't connect to other people. People are people, offline and online. This is also something that sometimes baffles me. We usually know how to behave with other human beings. If you're introduced to people at a party, you know how to say hello, people know how to make small talk, people know how to be nice or helpful. And why should it be different? Because we're online. We're not robots, people are not just screen names hidden behind keyboards. People are people, even when they're online. So a lot of the stuff that we know about how humans and relationships function remains valid online. So all the social skills that you have, you can use them online. Another important point is that your network cares about people, not where they come from. The whole idea of separating professional from private is, in my opinion, really counterproductive. Because, as I mentioned earlier, often your personal life comes and has an impact on your professional life. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you make friends at work, lifelong friends that you keep even though you've left the job. And so, when you think about networking, you should be thinking about people more than contexts. And the last point I'd like to make about networking is that I think it's important to have a balance between breadth and depth. What I mean by that is that, well, it's basically the strong ties and the weak ties. You have people who have huge networks and you have the impression they're trying to collect people, okay? So these are the people who have thousands and thousands of Facebook friends and they don't know everybody. I mean, they don't know who these people are anymore. Or the people at networking evenings who distribute business cards to everybody. You're not making a connection when somebody is doing that. So there's a balance to be found between speaking with only one person during the whole evening, you have maybe a deep connection, but only one, and just distributing business cards to everybody. There's a spot to find somewhere in the middle. And there's no magic recipe for that. I think every person needs to experiment and see where they're comfortable. Until now, I've used the expressions online and offline, and we generally do. Okay, we talk about online stuff and we talk about offline stuff. And there's a big problem with talking about things like that, is that it implies a distinction between the offline world and the online world, or even worse, real life and virtual stuff. What is going on online is just as real as what is going on offline. Okay, so and a lot of the problems that we have with how to approach the online world is because we see it as a space which is separate from the offline world, which is of higher value, or which is, well, more real, as I said. And you have this online world which is kind of strange and weird and we don't really understand how it works. But no, it's still filled with human beings. If you understand people, you can understand the online world. So I've already mentioned seeing the online world as a living space, okay, not a communication channel. I think that if you're thinking about, what is my message, or if you start drawing up a communication plan for yourself, I think you're going down the wrong road. I think we need to be people, and that's really the best way to use the online world for ourselves as professionals. And the last point that I put on this slide is context collapse. This is an expression to talk about the fact that when you go online, the different contexts of your life all collapse onto one another. And this is problematic for a lot of people. So as people, as humans, we have a faceted identity. We are not exactly the same person when we're with our intimate friends, or with our partner, or with colleagues, or with our singing buddies, or the people we go walking with on Sundays. Okay? but we're still the same person. We are one person, but we show slightly different aspects of ourselves. And so there are people who manage this kind of, it's not easy to be oneself in different contexts. And so sometimes, especially at work, you can end up feeling like you can't really be yourself at work, or you have to, wear a kind of mask or play a role, because you're there in a professional capacity. And so when you start bringing contacts from the professional world, we're used to seeing you a certain way, which is quite different from the way you are when you're partying in the evening, and you bring the people you party with also in the same space, then you have a problem. This is context collapse, okay? Your contexts suddenly are not distinct anymore because you are in them in different times and spaces, but they're all together on Facebook. And so, oh my God, what do I do? And I think there are two ways to deal with this. One of them is to clam up and to say, okay, so I'm not going to share anything. I'm going to share only very, very tame and uninteresting stuff about myself, which works in all contexts. And or I'm just not going to be present on Facebook, or I have an account that I'm not going to do anything with it because I don't want to expose myself. So that's one way of doing things. And the other way of doing things is say, okay, so I have different contexts, and people see different parts of me in different contexts, but everybody is like that. So let's accept the fact that as humans, that's how we are, and I'm going to risk exposing a bit more of myself to different contexts than what I normally would. And so I'm going to try and be a bit more integrated as a human being and show that person. But that's difficult. And in some situations it's not possible, or it's very scary to do. Moving back to business. We do business with basically people we know, people we like, people we trust. So, if you're looking for people to do business with you, A, they need to know you exist. Okay, so you can see how being present online can help that. If I hadn't been chatting in that chat room for a long time, then this conference organizer would probably not have known I existed. Or maybe he would have known because I had a blog, but this blog was a really personal blog. I talked about, it still exists, 16 years running now, where I talk about anything that I find interesting. It can be, it can be my holiday photos, or it can be deep thoughts about the internet. But and that's actually what I built my career on. Okay, I started in the field that I'm in because I was a blogger, and I was thinking about what I was doing as a blogger and what the internet was doing to people in relationships, and suddenly, somebody asked me to come and give a talk somewhere about this blogging thing, and that's how it started. Okay, so it's perfectly personal interest that suddenly became professional. So people need to know you exist. People we trust, so that is really more the professional track record stuff. And people we like, that has to do very often with building rapport, okay? I remember one anecdote from my time at Orange. It's a big company, okay, hierarchy, and at lunchtime, you'd end up sometimes sitting next to people you didn't work with. And I ended up sitting next to one of the managers, so she was like, I was at way bottom of the hierarchy, and she was quite high up. And so we were having lunch, and so we chatted a bit, and we discovered that we liked cats. And so we talked about cats for 45 minutes. Okay, cats are completely irrelevant to her and my professional life, but we connected. And this connection stayed, we lost touch for years, but it made us reconnect on Facebook. And we're working together now, And if we hadn't both liked cats, we probably wouldn't have chatted that much at lunchtime, we wouldn't have connected around something, and we wouldn't have ended up working together 15 years later. So, being present online as a person brings a lot of opportunities for building rapport with others. Because, so, as I try to demonstrate with my cat example, you never know what it can be about, what it is that's going to connect you to other people. And it's something that might be trivial or uninteresting. Okay, I mean, I like cats, but they're not my job. As I like cats, like people who have cats like cats. So you never know what it is that might connect you to somebody. You never know who it might be. And you can't necessarily judge if something that you're thinking about or that's of interest to you is going to connect you to people. And so if you're a bit open about yourself online, all these little messages in a bottle, which are not really messages with an ask in them, but just little bits and pieces about yourself, about different facets of yourself, all these could be anchors to connect you to somebody, and you don't know who and you don't know how. So that is the case for sharing stuff about yourself, even if it's uninteresting or not important or not professional. So how do you do this? This is the prescriptive part in my talk. Be a good online citizen. This is basically it. It's just be a good person. So I tried to break it down into various things, various good pieces of good advice. So be generous, give and bring value, be helpful. These are also the things that we say for networking, okay? Don't ask what the other person can do for you, ask what you can do for them. If you can put people in touch, do it, introduce them, and think about how easy it is to introduce people online, like on Facebook. Just create a private message with the two people and introduce them. It's super easy. Don't be needy, so don't be asking people to like your stuff all the time or to share your stuff all the time. You can ask for things if you've given enough. That's the whole social capital thing. If you've given your community enough, then every now and again you can afford to say, listen, I'm organizing a conference. Could you please share the event on your Facebook thing? And you send a private message to the person, and because the person likes you and you've been nice to them or you've helped them at one point, they'll do it. It doesn't cost much. But if you never give and always take, it doesn't work. Nobody likes a freeloader. Be a human being. I've said it again, I've said it before, saying it again, and I will repeat it probably yet another time before the end of the talk. It's really be a person. Don't try and be a brand. Try and be somebody. Well, we don't need to try, normally you are, just be it. Emotional honesty. That is, could give a whole talk around that. In the early days of blogging, one of the things that we would say about blogs is that bloggers have a good bullshit detector. If you write something, and there's this French brand L'Oréal who did a fake blog at one point in the early 2000s. And if you have 200 people a day who are reading it, somebody is bound to spot that something's fishy about it. Okay, this is also something that you find in the Clue Train Manifesto. If you haven't heard of the Clue Train Manifesto, look it up, read it. It's a really important publication. The human voice is recognizable. That you can recognize if it's a human being who's speaking or if it's a communication agency. And I think that emotional honesty, vulnerability, and also humor are some of the characteristics that will tell you that you're in touch with a person and not with somebody playing a role. And when you get an email from somebody you don't know, you know pretty fast from reading it if it's a canned email that a lot of other people are receiving, or if it's really one person who's contacting you person to person, and not because it's their job to be chatty and friendly and try to be a person. Vulnerability, if you haven't seen Brené Brown's TED Talk on the topic, look it up. She talks about how powerful being vulnerable is in making connections with others. And I've seen time and time again in my life, but also in other people who are very present online around me, when you dare to share stuff that scares you, it usually has very positive effects. Strive for integration, display various facets of yourself. Okay, this is what I was talking about before, the fact that you try and be one person, even if it means that maybe your work colleagues are going to know that you like walking during the weekends. And last but not least, have boundaries. Because when you say be yourself online, share stuff, yes, but it doesn't mean that you have to be, unfettered about it. You can share things about yourself and be open and still have good boundaries. And I think that one of the things that the online world does to us as people is it forces us to have good boundaries. Because you cannot, for example, simply for availability, now we're all very easily reachable. You can't just, count on the fact that people are not going to get your phone number, not going to call you. So we have to learn to say no. We have to learn what's acceptable to us and what isn't. And I think that is a very important skill to be able to have a good online presence, is knowing where your boundaries are. Also knowing what do I share, what do I not share. People often tell me that I write, a lot about myself, that I share everything. That is not true. There is stuff about myself that I do not write about online. And so my boundaries may not be where your boundaries are, but each person has them, so it's important to know where they are. In practice, have accounts. So have a Facebook account, have a Twitter account, have a LinkedIn account, etc., etc. Connect to people on those accounts. It's not enough to just have a Twitter account, you also need to follow people. Share stuff, either your stuff, your ideas, your thoughts, your deeds, or stuff that other people have produced but that you find interesting or relevant. Take measured risks. Again, I think taking a certain amount of risk in sharing stuff, being maybe a bit daring about certain things pays off, but don't do it without thinking. I mean, be a bit reasonable about it. Choose the values you stand for. This one is important for me. It's about a huge chapter that I could also give a whole talk on. Staying safe versus being an agent of change in the world or our communities. You cannot do both at the same time. If there is something you care about, if there are values that are important for you, and that you want to make things change in the world around you, then you are trying to be an agent of change, and that has a certain cost. I'll take one example because I think it's unavoidable these days with the American elections: sexism and misogyny. Okay, if feminism is something that's important for you, and you decide, okay, I'm going to share stuff, I'm going to speak up. Well, every now and again, you're going to get, people are going to get upset at you, or people are going to unfriend you, or people are going to not appreciate that you're so vocal about these things. And then you have to make a decision, is this a value that's important enough for me that I'm ready to pay this price to be an agent of change and try to have an impact around me? Or do I need to protect myself and retreat? Yeah, don't hide. Don't hide physically. Be there, be open. Don't be the person who's got a Facebook account and who never posts anything. That's just sad. It's missed opportunities. Accept that you're flawed and that you're going to make mistakes. Own up to them when you make them. Or if you look at the people who are really high-profile bloggers or entrepreneurs, that's one thing they're really good at. They're really good at messing up and owning it. And that is also a very human thing to do. Don't think too much. And listen to others. This is the other extreme from don't hide. It's people who are just posting. So it's all about pushing stuff out. But they're never listening. And if you want to make connections with other people, you need to see what they're sharing, what they're posting. Listen to them. Start by listening and respond if you have something to say or something to contribute. Which accounts? People often ask me, where should I be? And I think there's no good answer. I think you can't avoid Facebook today, because everybody is there. What I would recommend is open accounts everywhere. Try everything. and see what sticks, see what you like. You might discover that you like Snapchat, you might discover you hate it, you might discover that YouTube works for you or that it doesn't. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just surprised that LinkedIn is not in your list. Because
Oh!
that's
Well,
a very useful way to connect.
Yeah, I should have added it. But it's not, I'm not surprised at all that I forgot it. I don't really like LinkedIn, don't tell anybody. But it's got better with the years. But I think I joined it way too early, where it was just a glorified resume and there's nothing to do. You know, because it's just, okay, you list your professional stuff and then what? Whereas Facebook, people are on Facebook anyway to post their photos, holiday photos with friends or stuff like that. So, and business happens where people are.
It's not the same communication, of course, but it's a very powerful for business.
But no, you're right. I mean, LinkedIn should definitely be on the list. I'm just explaining why I forgot it. It's because I don't really like it, and I try and think, okay, I need to be more active on LinkedIn, but and I know people who use LinkedIn a lot and love it, and it's really useful for them. So it can be a really valuable platform. But I find that often people who are very invested in LinkedIn are also very invested in keeping the professional separate from the personal, and I think that is limiting. But yeah, definitely be on LinkedIn. You have to have a LinkedIn account today. And as I basically try things and see what you like, see what works for you. Maybe you're going to discover that you like video. Maybe you're going to discover that you don't really like Facebook, but you're very happy on Instagram, sharing photographs and connecting with people over there. One thing I haven't talked about yet is communities. So this is clearly a really important thing that happens online, is that people with similar interests kind of get together and gather up in communities. So you have all these online communities. And this is where you meet people online. And often you have communities like this one. There's an offline component and there's an online component. Okay, it's going to be a website part. There's a Facebook page. So there's a way to meet people offline and continue the connection online. Somebody once defined a community by saying a community is a group of people who care about each other more than they should. And I think it's a really nice definition, because it shows that there is an emotional component and an emotional investment in a community. So, find the online communities that you are at home in, find your tribe, and be active in the online communities that you are part of. And you will see that that will bring you closer to people, bring people closer to you, and open up opportunities. Time. When I talk about how important online presence is, people go, oh, but it takes so much time. I don't have the time to do it. And my answer to that is that it's taking time, depends on the kind of activity that you're doing. Because, I mean, this evening, you're there, you've taken what, 2 hours out of your week, 2-3 hours? Maybe more if you've traveled to come here, hang out with other people, listening to somebody blab about online presence. We take time for the stuff that we like. Often when we say, oh, it takes so much time, it's because it feels like work, or it's a task, or it's something we have to do. And I think that if you approach an online presence like a communication or marketing action, unless if you really love marketing, maybe you'd be happy to do it, but people who are not working in the field of marketing usually do not like doing marketing much. So you say, okay, I need to think about what I'm going to communicate on and how am I going to present myself, etc., etc. That is work, and I don't have time for that either. But chatting with my friends, I always have time for that. So if I make friends online somewhere, then I'm going to want to go and spend time with these people. And I think this is the difference between being versus doing. So if you can turn your online presence into not something that you do, but part of who you are, then you're not going to feel that it takes up time. You might end up with the opposite problems, that you need to hold back. And I've seen that with some students. I co-directed a course at Savvy on social media and online communities a few years ago, and so it was quite intense 4-day modules. And so the first module was about this kind of stuff, and we'd have people at the lunch break the first day they'd go, oh my god, I have to read. I mean, everything that I've learned until now, I need to throw it out the window. The world is completely different from what I thought. Very rattled. And then we get the students to learn how to use Facebook, Twitter, etc. And so, of course, at the beginning, I was like, oh. And I would have students come to me after maybe second or third module, and I say, hey, I think I'm starting to get it. I stayed up until 1 o'clock in the morning on Facebook yesterday. So this was 5 or 6 years ago, okay? So Facebook was not as spread out, well, not as common as it is today amongst the local Swiss population. But I think that when you have to keep yourself from doing it, it's that you're doing it right. It's a good sign. Because it means that what's drawing you in is the connections to people. And yeah, so again, being authentic versus having constructed presence. If it's constructed, it's work. If it's you, then it's just being you. It shouldn't be hard work to be you. And so I think more important than the time it takes is how much time it feels like, rather than how much time it really takes. I've noticed that as a freelancer, sometimes I feel like I have no time to do more things, but actually I have plenty of time to hang out on Facebook or sit on the balcony with my cats or go for a walk. What I don't have is space in my head for more stuff, for more work. But the stuff I enjoy doing, I actually do have time to do it. So it's really about a mindset. I think if you take away one thing from this talk, it's the idea that you never know where opportunities are going to come from. And they often come from the most unexpected places. And this is not a mystical thing. I don't believe that there is meaning in the world beyond the meaning that we as humans put in the world. Okay, so I don't believe that there's the universe conspiring to bring things to you or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, fine, some people believe in that, that's okay, but this is not the way I mean this. I just mean that you cannot plan for everything, and that often it's the unexpected that brings about the biggest changes. And so set things up in your life and in your online presence so that it is open to opportunities and new connections. And having a strong personal online presence is a way to do that. Questions, discussion, comments?
It's fantastic, Stephanie. Sorry, I have to give a little.
Does culture play into this? So depending on it's kind of hard to word it well, but does it matter how much the cultural influences are?
Sorry, how much?
How much does culture influence blogging? Is there because one thing that I try to do is I think sometimes when I write a blog or I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of thinking, am I wording this right? Am I appealing to lots of different cultures? Or and I'm always thinking about that, thinking, will I come across as insensitive to certain cultures if I cover a topic that I think is perfectly fine but might come across as rude to other people? And I'm constantly thinking about that. Is that?
So your question regarding that is, how important is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that
should we care about it? I guess.
I think it's important to care about this kind of stuff. I mean, what we do as humans. If you think about, if you're saying something to somebody, you usually think about how you're going to say it to that person, and you also think about how they might react to it. and yes, you think, okay, am I being insensitive if I say this or that? So I think that is being human, right? And so that's also why I say have boundaries and have filters. Being yourself, when I say being yourself, it doesn't mean, it's not in the kind of, let everything out and dance on the, I mean, if that's who you want to be, then go ahead and dance on the table. But if that's not who you are, then you don't have to, throw everything out. And so, I mean, when I write a blog post, I'm usually thinking about, I usually have somebody in mind that I'm writing for, or some type of, I have a kind of imaginary reader that I'm writing for, and so I'm writing for that person, and it's quite different from if I'm writing, for example, I'm organising some workshops this autumn, and so we made little prospectus, right? And so I had to write some, a bit more commercial copy. And so it's a very different state of mind. I still try to stay human when I'm writing commercial copy. I mean, I'm not very good at the commercial copy side of things, so I don't care. The human stuff I know how to do, so let me try and capitalize on that. But I think it's normal that you should. And when I share stuff on Facebook, I also think, okay, I'm going to share this. What the consequence is going to be. One piece of advice I used to give people who were blogging in the early days of blogging was, I think now it's very clear to everybody that if you're writing something on a blog, it's public, right? But in 2004, 2005, it was public, but not everybody was online, and so you had this illusion that you could write stuff on the blog and people would not learn about it. And so I would always say, when you've written something that you're posting online, always kind of have a little mental checklist. If this person sees it, if my grandparents read it, is it going to be okay? If the people I'm talking about it read it and they react badly, am I okay with it? It can be either, and this, again, it's the agent of change versus protecting oneself, protecting others. Say, okay, it's important for me to speak out on this, and if the person that I'm speaking about reads it and is pissed off, then I'm okay with it. Or you decide, I'm not okay with it, I don't want to make that person angry, and so I'm going to water it down, or I'm going to not talk about it, or I'm going to say something else. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yes?
I find it very interesting when you said that, you yourself online are people or a person, not a brand.
Yeah.
Because I found it really interesting, because whenever I think of myself, I always think of myself as a brand, and how do I want to be seen and portrayed, and how do I use the different online channels to portray myself, be it LinkedIn and Twitter for more of a professional sphere, and that's how I want to portray myself with, the knowledge in marketing or digital or whatever it is that I want to be seen as. And then I use Facebook and Instagram as really a personal thing. The place where I accept the people who follow me, and they are the ones who are allowed to see what I'm posting. So it's interesting, because I've always seen myself as like, what kind of brand, if I am a brand, how do I personify myself online? And how does that translate as myself? Myself as a person in person. So it's interesting when you said, think of yourself as a person and not a brand. So I'm sitting there going, but I think of myself as a brand.
So what area do you work in?
I work in marketing.
So I'm not surprised. If you work in marketing, you probably find marketing interesting and like it, right? So it's not a huge chore for you probably to think of yourself as a brand. I don't know how to do that, and many people who don't work in marketing, they don't know how to do that, and I think personal branding can work, but there's also a limit to it, because I think it will attract a certain type of connection with people, but maybe more focused, right? Because if you really manage to do the personal branding thing right, then you're going to connect more efficiently to the people that you are really targeting. It's a different strategy, I think. Both are valid.
And I think it's maybe the word brand is the one that scares people if they're not in marketing or they're not sure to do
Yeah.
it. But it's about identifying the different channels for their purpose, and not just, you know, if you are then going to walk away from this and start posting on some of the sites that you've suggested, you know, what is that platform for? You know, if you want to make the connections, whom are you targeting, or
but
whom
there
are you
you're
making the connection with?
in an approach where you are you're intellectualizing your presence, right? And so that can be work, right? Whereas what I'm trying to invite is to basically turn things around and say, okay, this is simply a space for people to be and interact, and let's see what we do with it. It's like, so for example, if you come to a networking event, are you thinking about your personal brand? If you're here and talking with people around a cup of coffee or tea?
Depends why I've come to the networking event.
Yeah.
For something like this nature, yeah, I'm gonna tailor my conversation to what we've all come for, which is digital.
Yeah.
If it's, you know, meeting friends for coffee, no, I'm not really thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it
you
depends on what the networking
a
is.
distinction between your professional self and your personal self.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because it depends on why I'm attending that social or networking.
And it's also your area of expertise.
Yeah.
So, okay, lots of hands.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would just like to add to that point that I think it's very interesting to know that, but I think it really depends upon what you're working on. For something like blogging, it's still very casual, and you can really put forward a lot from your personality, because that's what also reflects in your blog as well. But when you are like in online business, which is more like, I don't know, some online shop or something, then you probably cannot bring that much of your personality, because then you're not representing yourself, but like a shop or a store, which has a personality of itself and not too much of your personality.
Yeah, that's a distinction between business and person, right?
And it depends on what your field is, right? So like blogging is something that you write from your own personality. But when you are selling something, or when you have some other thing that doesn't have too much of your personality, then it's okay to have it more like a brand.
Sure.
Yeah.
But you could also say, my main asset in my business is me as a person. And so this is what I'm going to use to connect to people, and trust that with time, these connections are going to yield business. So it's more logic of, well, not maybe more, but it's logic of trying to attract people and opportunities, and help people who want to find you.
And that might also do with company culture if you're working for a larger company as well,
Yeah.
where a company just hasn't. I've worked with companies who have the most wild technology. They have so much to share, yet the culture within is so closed. They can't share their best assets that could sell that best, which would be the voice of their employees to shape the voice of their brand, because the brands are shaped by the voice of the community and the voice of the employees together.
One very good example of that was the thing, it was in 2004 or something, Microsoft had just come out of the antitrust stuff, so Microsoft was really seen as the bold, big, nasty, horrible company, everybody hated it. And they had these developer conferences where their developers would meet and mix with external developers who were working with Microsoft products. And these conferences always went extremely well, and the contacts between the developers and the Microsoft developers were always really, really good, and they came out of these conferences having a really positive image of the company, when Microsoft's brand was actually in a situation where it was not doing that well. And around that time, Microsoft did two things. One, they opened a blogging platform, and they encouraged their engineers, software people, etc., everybody to blog. So there's this blogging platform. At one point, there was 3,000 or 4,000 Microsoft employees who were blogging on that platform, and it was very open. It was, you know, the blogging policy was be smart. So just, people don't want to get fired, you know. Be smart. Just don't. And I remember, I think it's when Vista came out, they had speech recognition embedded in the OS, and they did a demonstration of that speech recognition, and it was a disaster. It did not work at all. So the guy who was doing the demo said, you know, dear mum, and it wrote dear aunt or whatever. It was a disaster, and everybody was making fun of it. It was on all the blogs and all the papers. And on one of these Microsoft employee blogs, there was an article saying, yeah, that was my bug. So that was an article written by the software engineer who was actually working on that bug, and who explained how they ended up having that bug at the demo. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because now that I've read that article, my perception of the company has shifted a bit, okay? I'm less, yeah, Microsoft, they're not even capable of doing the speech recognition right for the demonstration, ha ha ha. You know, then so, okay, yeah, this shit happens, it's a problem, it happens. And you've all experienced that. When you know an employee in a big company, you have a different vision of the company. If the company is really toxic, you probably have a really worse vision of the company. But if the company is an okay company with good people in it, the fact that you know somebody in the company puts a face on the company. It makes it more human, makes it more approachable. And the other thing that Microsoft did around that time is they started a blog called Channel 9. Well, it was a video blog at the time. They actually hired a blogger to make videos for it. This guy's name is Robert Scoble, and he had a little handheld video camera, rather low quality. And he would, knock on people's office doors and say, "Hey, so what do you do at Microsoft?" And they would have like hour-long video conversations. And Robert is, he's a nice guy, he's funny, he's a geek, he knows how to ask good questions and be curious, and he's enthusiastic. And people would actually watch these hour-long videos, which would show what the inside of the company was to the outside. And they called it Channel 9 because I think it's Southwest, but it might be another of these airlines in the US. When you're on the airplane, you have these different channels that you can put your headphones on. Channel 1, Channel 2, Channel 4. And Channel 9 was the channel where you could hear what was being said inside the cockpit. You could hear the communications in the cockpit. And they set that up for people who are afraid of flying. Because if you're afraid of flying, and you get a chance to actually hear them, oh, nothing is happening now because the pilot, because they're organizing this and that, or, oh, the guy who's flying the plane seems to know what he's doing, okay, he might not fall out of the sky right now. So that's why they called it Channel 9, because it was a blog to help people who are afraid of the big bad Borg, Microsoft, feel a bit more friendly towards the company. And so this is one example, but there have been many demonstrations of that when you give a voice to the employees inside the company, it humanizes the company. And as Kelly said, it's often it's the addition of the people in the company that make the company, right? And its perception. Yes.
Yeah. So that's we'll talk about my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
I have a background in engineering, marketing, sales, digital, IT, a lot of stuff. 3 years ago, I was in a situation with a career change, and I decided not to publish anything too much personal. And last May, I was working in a startup, and they had financial problem. My position was abolished, and I decided to try something else and to publish more personal stuff, and to forget the branding and so on. Especially on Facebook, and it's incredible the change in the people I'm seeing after. I'm always surprised, even today at lunch, I met people and they're talking about my post on Facebook and so on. Even people that never comment and never like or whatever, there's much more followers than what I can see, and the relationship is completely different. And the other thing is that I have included professional contact on my Facebook, so it's no more just close friend or whatever. It's very large, and for the professional side, it's helping a lot because I'm more a person, as you said. They can see my interest, my character. I'm sharing more emotional things, and the links is completely different. So for me to mix both together It's a really a good thing, even if I'm looking for a job right now.
Yeah. You remember the slide that we do business with people that we know, that we trust, and that we like.
Yeah.
And so the liking thing. So again, I'm not a marketing person, but I'm not sure that a brand can make people like you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
feel
was
that
not expecting
okay, Kelly doesn't really agree, so I'll take that back at least partly. But I think and again, I think it's different if your area of expertise is marketing, then in a way you need to demonstrate that you know how to do it. Okay, but even so, I think it's easier to be liked as a person. It's quite easy to be liked as a person. I mean, we do it every day. Connect with other people.
So for me, that's a good recipe.
Everybody's hungry.
Questions? Stephanie, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. I'm just going to say thank you to, we didn't advertise this. This was kind of an off-the-cuff thing. We didn't advertise on the Facebook page. We had 4 people who watched, and one was Natasha, who's in the hospital, so we can all say hi. And hi, Natasha. And she was like, yay, I can follow from my bed. Thanks, girls. So she's very excited. And this is something that I'm going to talk to the other organizers about, that we can film, upload, and then we have a nice archive, and those will go on the website at some point too, because it's fantastic. It's fantastic content. So thanks to Liz and Everin and Natasha for joining us. And I'm gonna shut down now because we're gonna go eat and drink, and you can't do that.